threat-based, intelligence-driven, and operationally focused strategy to increase our situational awareness and our confidence levels across every mile of the United States borders. Evaluate current policies and laws which directly impacts our mission to protect our nation's borders, with the emphasis on broadening enforcement operations and increasing consequences for those illegally crossing our borders. Reinforce our multi-layered enforcement strategy and strengthen our situational awareness by continuing smart investments in infrastructure, technology, personnel, and operational assets. The same smart investments in our facilities needs to continue to be a top priority as well. We need to enhance our agility, focusing both on mobile technology and a mobile workforce. Continue to strengthen our enforcement operations by expanding our intelligence-driven methodology, counter-network strategies, air and marine operations, and integrated operations with our partners, both domestically and internationally. We need to expand and integrate our information technology systems. We need to focus on targeted expansion of our human intelligence base, our document exploitation capacity, and our collection and dissemination capabilities. We need to identify personnel needs across the spectrum of position classifications to ensure we have the correct balance of agents, staff, and intelligence analysts. We need to focus and determine alternatives concerning the allocation of resources in support of the current humanitarian mission the United States Border Patrol is being asked to do in an effort to get badges back to the border. Develop a proactive communication strategy in an effort to engage our internal and external partners and stakeholders. And we need to enhance performance matrix to reflect our efforts toward our strategy, focusing on threats and our mitigation effectiveness. As we move forward, we will continue to focus on these priority areas, all of which will enhance the United States Border Patrol's ability to detect, prevent, and respond to threats along our nation's borders. We look forward to sharing our efforts with the committee in the future, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify here today, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Morgan. Our next witness is Ms. Carla Provost. Ms. Provost is the current Deputy Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection within the Department of Homeland Security. Deputy Chief Provost is the first woman to be appointed Deputy Chief in the agency.
Thank you. Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Carper, and distinguished members of the committee, it's a privilege to be here today alongside Chief Morgan. This is a proud moment for me, as this is my first appearance at a congressional hearing representing the dedicated and hardworking men and women of the United States Border Patrol. Though today marks 1 month into my current position as Deputy Chief, I've spent the majority of my professional law enforcement career, nearly 22 years, serving in the U.S. Border Patrol. During that time, I've seen quite an evolution. I entered on duty with the Border Patrol in January of 1995, and as an agent in the field in both urban and remote border environments, I worked alongside my colleagues to address threats ranging from illegal immigration, smuggling, trafficking, and terrorism by targeting, detecting, and interdicting potentially dangerous people and materials. I was also significantly involved with training and management aspects of Border Patrol operations across 4 different sectors in all 4 states along the southwest border, instructing agents in law, firearms, bike patrol, directing sector budgets and human resources while overseeing operations. When I first came on board, there were less than 5,000 Border Patrol agents nationwide. We were still processing on typewriters, and correction tape was worth its weight in gold. That year, we apprehended nearly 1.3 million people on the southwest border alone. As you can imagine, we did not possess the tools or technology that agents use today. Back then, it was common for the border to be marked by little more than a 3-strand barbed wire fence, or in many places, nothing at all. We relied on 1960s-era aircraft for aerial support, and sometimes homemade sensors and lighting to notify us of illicit activity. In the year 2000, we hit our high water mark of more than 1.6 million apprehensions nationwide. With that came a renewed focus on border security, and the tragedy of 9/11 only intensified that commitment. As I progressed, so did the Border Patrol. We began hiring new agents in earnest, growing our presence along the border dramatically. Not only did this increase our situational awareness, but it also impacted local business and economy. Growth in many areas along the border seemed to mirror our own. Newer technology, to include sensors, night vision, and remote video surveillance, began to improve our capabilities. New tools like tasers and pepper ball launching systems gave us new and different approaches to uses of force. Thanks to Congress, we received new patrol roads and fencing in strategic locations and saw improvement in many of those already in existence. Here in Washington, I led the stand-up of CBP's Use of Force Center of Excellence, which is now known as the Law Enforcement Safety and Compliance Directorate, dedicated to optimizing the safety, readiness, accountability, and operational performance of CBP law enforcement personnel by articulating use of force policy and supplying the highest quality education and training to our agents and officers. I also served as the Deputy Assistant Commissioner of CBP's Office of Professional Responsibility, overseeing compliance with all CBP-wide programs and policies relating to corruption, misconduct, internal security, and integrity awareness. I am proud to have the opportunity to bring my field experience and perspective to the U.S. Border Patrol headquarters. I look forward to working with Chief Morgan and all of my colleagues in the Border Patrol, CBP, and our many partners to enhance our operations, to protect our nation's borders, and ensure the safety of the public that we serve. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Provost. I'll start the questioning with Chief Morgan. Obviously I'm concerned about the continued flow of unaccompanied children for a host of reasons. Because we have not ended the incentives for people to come into this country illegally, children continue to take a very dangerous journey through Mexico to come to this country, and lives are being lost, and assaults are perpetrated on, and these children become real victims. Talk a little bit about how the flow of unaccompanied children, how that overstresses your resources and how it distracts from your other missions.
Yes, sir. So I refer to the Border Patrol's involvement with UACs and family units as one of humanitarian at this point. We know that basically of the OTMs, which now is about 63% of our apprehensions, and to include the single-family males, focusing on just UACs and family units alone on the OTM side, it's about 44% of our overall apprehensions. RGV alone, it's probably closer to around 50%. That takes an exorbitant amount of resources and funding to sustain those operations, knowing that basically 100% of those family units and UACs are released into the United States. That's why I call that a humanitarian mission. I refer back to on a midnight one evening, I was in a sector where I saw a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old holding each other's hands that had made the trek from Honduras. I don't refer to that 6-year-old and 11-year-old as a national security or law enforcement threat. But again, the Border Patrol is dedicating a tremendous amount of resources, taking those folks in, processing them. At times, a lot of resources are dedicated to being professional child care providers at this point. In RGV alone, we've actually just established a second CPC, a processing center in RGV. Each one of those processing centers takes about 100 to 120 agents to man, dedicated basically 100% to processing and taking care of the family units and UACs. We just recently opened up a temporary holding facility in Torino to help with that. Ursula, as I know everybody's familiar with, that comes at a high cost as well to be able to run that facility and provide the resources. I recently, when I traveled to RGV, the PAC, the supervisor that was in charge, said, Chief, we're going to do whatever this country asks us to do. But I never thought in my 20 years that I would be, as part of the procurement, ordering baby powder and baby wipes. Actually, I just got from one sector where agents, one of their jobs during the day is to actually make sure that the food, the burritos that were provided, are being warmed properly. It takes a tremendous amount of resources to do this.
Can you talk about, the realities on the border when you have a flood, let's say 50 or 100 unaccompanied children and family members, the way they can be used as diversion for higher value smuggling, whether it's drugs or human or sex trafficking? I mean, isn't that the reality of what's actually happening?
Yes, we have information on that. Absolutely. Smugglers use that as a distraction. Yes, sir. And, again, the resources, it absolutely is impacting. As a Chief United States Border Patrol, I'm comfortable in saying is that the mission the humanitarian mission with the UACs and family units, it is impacting our ability to perform, I think, our national security law enforcement mission. I am taking a considerable amount of resources and agents from away from the border to take care of this mission.
So this is a problem we have not solved, and I'll quote back in July 9th, 2014, when Chairman Carper at the time called a hearing on this. Senator Carper said, how do we change the mindset to turn off the flow so the parents will say, I want my kids to stay here, have an opportunity, have a future here? How do we do that? And I think it's the right question in terms of how do we stop the flow. And I think we probably have some difference of opinions in terms of the effective way to stop the flow. I think Senator Carper, again, I would love to improve the conditions in Central America so there's not the incentive, the push factor, but I'm always talking about the pull factor. And if we put up our other chart of just UACs, we see that of the children that have come here unaccompanied in 2013, 14, 15, and 16, at least the last 3 years, we're returning less than 4%. And so isn't the reality that if you come as an unaccompanied children from Central America and you get into this country, and by the way, it's easy to get in here. You just walk across the bridge, turn yourself in, and you're apprehended, you're processed, and dispersed. And they have access to social media, so more children, more families in Central America realize, and it creates an incentive, pay the fee, take the dangerous journey, because if you get into America, you're going to stay. Isn't that an enormous problem and one of the reasons why we haven't solved this problem?
Yes, sir. When we talk about push-pull, if we go back just a little while, 2006, 90% of those we were apprehending were Mexican nationals, and now we're at 36%. Why? Well, there's a couple of things that happen why we see that dramatic decrease. One is a solid consequence delivery system. There's a couple of things that happen. One is we instituted ER, expedited removal, so that the individuals knew that when they came, they were being held and then they were being removed. That was a consequence. They knew that, and it served as a strong deterrence. The other thing, one example.
Let me just interrupt you. So that's with Mexicans,
yes, sir,
or Canadians. But talk about the difference between Mexicans and unaccompanied children or family units from Central America.
Yes, sir. So what's happening with the UACs and the family units, the OTMs as we call them, from Central America is it's basically the same thing. Is right now they know that if they make it to the border, they will be released into the interior of the United States. Delivery system, we do see that positively impacting the flow, meaning it does go down. So that's definitely factual. We can show that over the years. I think we need to have a facilitated discussion as well about some current law and policy. And I can give you one example, credible fear. So we know right now that smuggling organizations are absolutely using and exploiting a credible fear. We know that they're coaching individuals on specifically what to say when they come here. They just rattle off and they memorize the magic words that they need to say so that they'll fall within the statute of credible fear. We think that that's being exploited. We think that it's been going well beyond the original intent of the purpose of credible fear, like sort of the example you just used, right? That's what credible fear is supposed to be used for, absolutely. But we know it's being exploited. So I think that is one thing that we can do as part of CIR is to take a look at those policies where it makes sense and try to have a good facilitated discussion. Are there some adjustments that need to be done going forward? Credible fear alone from 2000 to 2013, less than 1% were claiming credible fear coming across. Today, it's exponentially gone and it's continued to rise. We see that as an issue. Again, going back to the NTA, the notice to appear, we know that that's definitely a pull factor. We know that they're communicating, and they're like, hey, it doesn't matter. If you get here, you will be released. You say these magic words, even if you don't say the magic words, you're still going to be let into this country. I think we need to have a discussion about our utilization of the NTA to make sure that we're really applying it where it's needed going forward. I think that needs to be part of the facilitated discussion on immigration reform.
Okay, I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, I just say one last quick sentence if I could. I've said this before. I think it pertains, it's still appropriate today. No silver bullet to resolve it. No silver bullet. A lot of silver BBs. Some are bigger than others, and we need to do them all. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Carper. Again, I really appreciate the well-attended hearing here, so let's really keep it to 7 minutes. I ask the senators as well as the witnesses to keep the question and answers within the 7 minutes, and we'll proceed, and everybody can have a chance to ask questions. Senator Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your having the hearing today because it's a critical time. And Chief Morgan, welcome to the committee and to you and Deputy Chief Provost and your officers out there in the field. We appreciate what you guys do every day. As we heard earlier, it's under tough circumstances. And to a certain extent, you're working under constraints that make it difficult for you to do your job. I'm going to change the topic a little bit and talk about drugs, and particularly the transnational criminal organizations that bring those drugs across our border. As you know, this Congress, the Senate and the House has acted. The President has signed legislation importance of reducing the demand for drugs. It focuses on prevention, education, treatment, recovery. Helps to get prescription drugs off the shelves. That's all important. We have an opportunity in the next couple of days here actually to look at new legislation to put even more money into those efforts, and we all think that's important. I believe that's really the core, but there is still a huge issue with these drugs coming across the border. We have the opportunity to be able to increase the price of these drugs by better enforcement. Some statistics that I've seen indicate that we're stopping only about 1.5–2% of these drugs that are coming across the border. Recently, we had testimony before this committee indicating that about 100% of the heroin and about 90% of the cocaine is coming across the border. Much of it, of course, from Mexico, particularly with regard to heroin. And even methamphetamines. Most of methamphetamines are now coming across the border from Mexico. And so, my question to you all is, what can you do better to stop these drugs, increase the price, stop some of the consequences of these transnational criminal organizations, which not only add to crime here in this country, but of course make these other governments, Mexico, Central American countries, Colombia, and so on, much more vulnerable to corruption. And, frankly, if you look at these numbers, they're increasing, not decreasing. So I guess my first question to you is, are my statistics right? Are we only stopping about 1 or 2% of these drugs that are coming over the border, this poison that's coming into our communities? Do you think that's accurate?
Sir, first and foremost, I would say, as you know, and you mentioned the amount coming across, we track everything that we apprehend, and you are correct. We are having numbers of methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and marijuana crossing our borders. That being said, we use all of the resources that we can to the best of our ability to try to detect and apprehend, whether it be at the said, the unknown is a difficult thing to measure for us. We do know that our numbers thus far this year for FY17 year to date, everything has been trending down except for methamphetamines, which is up slightly at this point year to date compared to FY 2016. But we will.
If I could just interrupt you for a second, Deputy. Sure. That concerns us because we see an increase in overdose deaths. We're now seeing about 120 people dying a day in this country, 5 a day in my home state of Ohio alone. Everybody on the front lines is saying the same thing, which is getting worse, not better. And this is the source of the biggest increase, which is heroin. The other one is carfentanil and fentanyl and U4 and the synthetics, which is coming by mail primarily,
Yes.
which you have less control over, although you guys hear a lot about that too, and the STOP Act, some of us are proposing will help there. But you're saying you're apprehending less of it, and yet we're seeing more of it in our communities.
Well, that is just through the beginning of FY17, so the last 2 months. Our numbers are down slightly, but trending very closely across the board to where we were last year. When we talk about how much we interdict, that is a difficult number to determine because of difficult to say what we Border Patrol. We have many more tools now than we did in the past to assist us. We have grown in our capacity with canine officers and such, utilizing other sources to help us.
Deputy, let me just interrupt you again because my time is ending here. You say you're using every resource that you have at your disposal, and yet my understanding is you have not asked for help from Operation Phalanx, for instance, which is a DOD operation and would help in terms of monitoring, would help also in terms of just the transporting, because some of these drugs come in, as I understand it, illegally by air just across the border on small strips. Why are you not accessing some of these DOD resources that are available to you?
So we actually are in dialogue to continue that operation. I know there's...
So you're changing your view on that, and you're going to ask for their help?
From my perspective as a chief of the United States Border Patrol, I agree with you. We need the help.
Do you need additional resources beyond Operation Phalanx to be able to do your job?
Yes.
I think that's important for this committee to hear because, again, I don't know if it's 1.5%, 2% that you're actually able to stop, but it's a very small number. I think you would agree with that. And you indicate you're using all the resources that you have. You have new detection and monitoring capabilities, but obviously it's not working to be able to stop this flow of the poisons. And again, some of it is stopping it, some of it is increasing the cost. Ultimately, I think the cure is going to be more on the demand side, but we've got to be able to do a better job at the border.
Yes, sir, I agree. And it really goes to that threat-based, intelligence-driven, operationally focused approach as well. So we need to increase our counter-network strategies. We need to work through initiatives like Stone Garden with our domestic partners. We need to continue to work with our international partners, Canada and Mexico as well, right? We need to really take the fight to the enemy and stop it before it even touches the border. Those are all things we are doing, but we
V.A.A. From other federal agencies and how we can be helpful to you to really begin to make progress on increasing these apprehensions and stopping the flow of some of these poisons. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could I just mention, Mr. Chairman, in the NDAA is a requirement to use drones. Right now, drones are flying out of Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and you're not coordinating with them, which is crazy. That is totally unsatisfactory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Morgan, I will narrow this in a moment to a question that I hope you'll be able to answer, but I just want to give voice to the fact that I have been hearing as a senator in the state of Wisconsin and certainly reading in the news reports of a significant escalation of harassment, bullying, and hate incidents directed to immigrants, to African Americans, to Muslims, to other minorities in recent weeks. And it has been very distressing to hear some of my constituent accounts. Recently, the Southern Poverty Law Center that is tracking some of the hateful incidents in the weeks after our recent election said that anti-immigrant incidents were the most common type of harassment that has been reported. In my home state, I have received communication from a wide number of individuals. I heard from a father in a community, Tomahawk, Wisconsin, who told me that, quote, while in school, my son, who is adopted from Guatemala, was approached by a classmate and was told to pack his bags for Mexico. A few weeks ago, there was a documented report of an anonymous hate mail sent to a family in Fitchburg, Wisconsin. The letter to the family, which includes 11 adopted children from the U.S., from Ghana, and China, read in part, "Trump won, go home, race wars are on." It's not only happening in Wisconsin, as I mentioned, and it's across the country, and it's deeply concerning to me and goes against the values that we hold as Americans. I have also heard from constituents in the immigrant community about their very real fears about potential anti-immigrant policies under the incoming administration. For example, I've heard from legal green card holders that they are afraid to travel in the next few months because they fear that they may be turned away or subject to additional scrutiny when they seek to return to the United States. And so I want to ask you, and in connection with helping to reassure that my constituents and other legal immigrants, that nothing will change in the U.S. Border Patrol's process for determining immigration status. And if you might add, I would like to hear about the training that your officers receive on the treatment of individuals in the Border Patrol's custody, including harassment and discrimination against immigrants and other minorities.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, everything you just described goes against everything I personally believe as well as an American. So I agree with you 100%. As far as the United States Border Patrol, what we're doing and how we're doing it is not going to change. The current law and policy that we've been directed to operate under, that's what we continue to operate. When that changed, then we will change, and we will enforce the law and the policies that we're directed to do. But right now, we understand the law, we understand the policies that they are written. The United States Border Patrol will comply with those policies going forward. There's not going to be a change. Once there is immigration reform, and if there's new policies, we'll adjust accordingly. As far as the training at the Academy, it's absolutely a significant topic at the Academy. I think we actually have one of our best leaders leading the United States Border Patrol Academy, and Chief Patrol Agent Harris. I personally had numerous conversations with him. In my former life, I was Assistant Director of the FBI's Academy as well, where these things were talked about as well, implicit bias and et cetera. Those are critical things that we focus on, and we need to focus on, and we continue to focus on.
Can you provide any additional detail on the curriculum during the training, other than those broad comments you've just made?
No, ma'am. I can't provide like specific topic areas, but I can follow up and provide that.
Okay. My understanding is that the U.S. Border Patrol is currently 50% over capacity at its holding facilities. And I understand that you're in the process of building additional temporary facilities which will continue to provide medical attention and clothing and other resources to women and children in particular. In addition to service on this committee, as you know, I serve on the Homeland Security Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. And with that in mind, can you speak to what resources are currently needed with regard to dealing with overcapacity issues in your holding facilities?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, Torino is one that we set up. It's a 500-bed capacity right now. It comes at a high cost. We're actually positioned to open up more in other areas where we do have an overflow. Some areas along the southwest border, we're actually at more than over 100% capacity. In some of our areas. So places like the temporary holding facilities like Torino is necessary for us to deal with that overflow. It comes at a high cost. Like you said, I mean, it's really from A to Z, and it really is a child care professional stuff that we're doing, clothing them, feeding them, making sure that they get the medical attention, making sure that they're able to sleep, making sure that they get appropriate meals during the day, make sure that they have snacks and the meals are warm and all that stuff that we should be, right, providing a child and
Senator Portman asked about the heroin and fentanyl interdiction at the southern border, and this is something that I've also focused on in the Armed Services Committee along with the chairman of that committee, Chairman McCain, in terms of working with our leaders in Southcom and Northcom in enhancing their resources for interdiction there, because as those networks, as I understand it, they can be used to traffic anything. And so especially as we think of the devastation that Senator Portman referenced, which we've seen in my state as well, when it comes to heroin and fentanyl.
I think it's already in part been described by everybody here, and you know it. First of all, we have to strengthen those partnerships. We have to strengthen that intelligence mechanism that really, through counter-network operations, right, both domestically and with our international partners, to really take the fight to them.
Right.
If they've made it to the border, we've kind of, in essence, already lost, right? So we've really got to strengthen that intelligence apparatus.
And I mean, as I understand it, on the Armed Services Committee, there also is a role, I think, for some of the role of our military on the other, obviously, and their role, thinking about their partnerships.
Yes, ma'am. And so we also need to work with the IC, with the intelligence community as well, then to make sure that intelligence that we're gathering at the border by the great men and women Border Patrol. The amount of information intelligence they get at the border is overwhelming in a good way. We need to make sure that the stuff that we know and the stuff that we get, we're getting it to the right people so that they can do what they need to do that we're not able to do in an overseas environment. It's absolutely right. We have to continue.
Senator Peters are also on that bill. I'm appreciative of that. As a northern border state, this to me is very important as well. And wanted to know if you were familiar with the Northern Border Security Review Act, what your view is as to the potential issues at our northern border. And I know that those issues are issues that can impact our national security. So what's your assessment of where we are on the northern border, and what is your view of the Security Review Act and whether you think it would be helpful?
So first of all, I think the act would be helpful. Anything that's going to have us further the dialogue and further focus on the northern border is a good thing. I'm trying to use the right adjective to talk about the northern border. So I think, and we had the discussion yesterday, I think the right word I would use, I'm concerned about the northern border and the threats that are posed there. And obviously we're in an unclassified environment, so it has to be narrow how we talk about that. But again, I'll go back to that 100,000 gang members or 100,000 6-year-olds, the output of that measure will be the same. But we're really not talking about the so what behind it. So what I want to make sure, we can focus on numbers because we have to deal with the numbers, but I want to make sure that in all that we do, our allocation of resources, our request for requirements and resources, our measures and matrix, that first and foremost, it's focused on the so what. It's focused on the threat and not just on the activity numbers going forward. I think we need to continue to strengthen that.